Well, we finished all the 10. Yeah, we finished the 10 TOS and TNG movies, Clay, but now we're on to the Kelvin movies, the Kelvin timeline. And all this really means is that it's going to make us give us a cause to re-edit our top 10 rankings, which have to become top 13 after this is all said and done. So, outside of that huge amount of work, we're on to the Kelvin movies. When I've seen Star Trek 2009 before. I think I saw it once, and I could not remember 95% of it and what happened. So this is the first rewatch I've had to this movie in a very, very long time. But what about you?
I have watched this a few times. I really enjoy this movie. I've owned it on DVD since it came. I actually last night just bought the 3 of them on Blu-ray.
Yeah,
because I think this is probably the best looking Star Trek movie up to this point. Mm-hmm. And watching it on standard definition on a giant TV just wasn't getting it done for me.
Oh, so you bought a long time ago. If you just have the standard DVD, you can get the Blu-rays of all 3 of them for like $5 on Amazon at this point.
Yeah, I got it. I got it more or less right when it came out on DVD because when this came out, I hadn't really watched Star Trek since I was probably a kid. I would watch Wrath of Khan and First Contact. I wouldn't say infrequently, but it was in my rotation. Mm-hmm. But this was the first new Star Trek content that I had seen outside of those 2 movies, probably since I stopped watching TNG.
Yeah, since Star Trek kind of died in the late 90s or mid 90s, whenever you want to say that the deathbed was. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of it's kind of like our listener base here, and it's similar to the Star Wars movies in a lot of ways, where like if you were born after a certain year, you just like the prequels, basically.
Right.
For a certain kind of Star Trek fan, a lot of our listeners have actually said that 2009 is the thing that got them into Star Trek, and then they would go back and see that. So it is a very important dividing line that's very similar to the prequels, at least, and probably more relevant, like the newest trilogy of Star Wars movies.
And then Star Trek Into Darkness is the thing that made them go, wow, Star Trek is terrible. We might have slightly inverse relationships here. You probably sound like you like this movie a lot and you hate Into Darkness. I'm like a lukewarm switch in the other direction on both of them. Oh, God.
So we'll see. But let's take a break. We're going to play some music, and then we'll come back and we'll break down Star Trek 2009.
Accessing library computer data.
Make sure that history never forgets the name Enterprise.
All right, so this movie is called Star Trek. It came out on May 8th, 2009, written by Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman, our old Star Trek Discovery showrunner, directed by JJ Abrams in the gig that he did to get Star Wars, produced by JJ Abrams and Damon Lindelof. So it's a lot of names of people who now control pretty much all Hollywood content at this point, 10 years later. In this movie, a cataclysm in the 24th century throws 2 ships back in time to the 23rd century, altering the course of history. With a different life where he never knew his father, James T. Kirk becomes a brilliant yet cynical misfit who is finally convinced to join Starfleet by Captain Christopher Pike in 2255. 3 years later, Kirk, Vulcan First Officer Spock, and the young crew of the new Enterprise, with guidance from Spock's future self, must figure out a way to work together to prevent the one responsible for the death of Kirk's father, the future Romulan known as Nero, from destroying the Federation in a mad quest for vengeance. So, judging by that, there's a lot of time travel in this episode. Clay, let's I think the best place to start with this is the mechanics of what allows this universe to exist, really. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good place. I find the time travel here to be functional, but also the more you think about it, the less it works in a lot of ways. I don't really know if that's important. And what I think that they did by changing the timeline and rebooting it in a different sort of universe from the Prime universe is probably the best way to go, even though a lot of people don't really like that. But I think that I think this works, and it also, the time travel aspect of this makes this movie feel to me very much like a pilot movie, where they're expecting to go off after this movie ends and come off with 2 other movies or a new show or whatever. And What do you think of the time travel, I guess, is the best way to start this? What do you think of the mechanics of starting the series off in a whole new universe where you can do with whatever?
Oh, I think it's great. I think I would rather they do that. I think they found a really creative way to reboot everything and not be necessarily beholden to the continuity of the original, while also maintaining the continuity of the original.
Yeah.
I think it's the best case scenario for what they could have done, because it allows you to do so much more stuff. It gives you wiggle room that Star Trek Discovery doesn't really have, because then you keep thinking like, well, then how does this fit into this if this is there and then he has to be in this place? And it also adds a bit of unpredictability to things. And I think because the problem with doing a prequel is if you're dealing with all of the things that people know, then generally there's only a set amount of things that can happen. Like there's not too much tension involved. Like if you start,
you know the ending if it's a prequel. You know who survives and who doesn't.
Whereas in this one, it starts with the future timeline where Romulus gets blown up, which is a huge status quo shift, and then they go back in time and they blow up Vulcan, which is a gigantic status quo shift
for this universe. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and so it gives it more a little bit more edge, a little bit more unpredictability, and stops it from just being like a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a nostalgia.
Yeah.
Wave.
Yeah.
And I think I'll tell you, the thing I was thinking the whole time I was watching this is it's not entirely dissimilar, obviously, to Star Wars, The Force Awakens, but it's so much more daring and exciting than that movie is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a movie that I enjoy. I think the character work is nice and et cetera, et cetera. But this one is like this, they're not beholden to they're not telling a story that's like a revamp of a story that they've told before. I mean, I guess you could say like, well, he's Wrath of Khan. Well, it's not really Wrath of Khan. He's just a guy who is out for revenge. Not everybody who's out for revenge is Khan.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just on the face of it, it's an origin story where we've never seen the origin of Kirk before.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And they're telling a brand new story inside the shell of an established world. It doesn't feel, not that we've covered Solo yet, but it's not a origin story of Kirk like Solo is an origin story of Solo, where it's like, let's just tell you all the stuff that we already know, but expand on it, so it's kind of boring.
Yeah.
It's you get to see how the character dynamics connect and everything, and I just think it's a really, I thought it was a great way to reboot the franchise, personally.
I think. Well, before I get into sort of where that was going to take me, let's talk a little bit specifically about the time travel aspect here. So the way that this works, and you can let me know if this is wrong, is that Romulus is destroyed in the Prime timeline by a supernova that Spock was unable to get a solution to before it destroyed the planet. So this causes a miner named Nero, and a miner like a person who digs in rock, not a under 18-year-old Romulan. Child Romulan. A miner named Nero to hunt down Spock, and both of them fall into the black hole that is Spock's creation to stop the destruction of Romulus. So they go back in time at that point.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Nero comes out first, and he, going back in time, alters the timeline from that point forward. So this is pretty much my big first kind of like technical issue or wonder about how this is supposed to happen. So are we supposed to assume that when he goes back in time, the timeline prior to him showing up is exactly the same as TOS?
I would assume so, yeah.
So why does the captain of the first ship of the Kelvin that he runs into not know Spock? Is it a Yesterday's Enterprise situation where once he enters it, everything changes for some reason?
Well, I mean, at the point that he goes back, Spock would...
Oh, he's too young, isn't he?
Yeah, he would be a child. He wouldn't even have been born yet.
Oh, I guess that's a good point. So I guess ignoring that, it is TOS's universe at that point before Nero shows up. It's like the same history on both timelines?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
Okay. So then Nero goes back in time and he has to wait 25 years because Kirk has to grow up for the movie. Otherwise, it won't work. So he has to sit around for 25 years, and then Spock comes through the black hole. He captures Spock, and then he blows up Vulcan, and then Nero wants to blow up all the other Federation planets. So I guess that the time travel thing pretty much works for me. I guess my biggest problem about whether or not the TOS timeline is intact or not kind of ties into what I think is maybe my weirdest thing about the movie, is that by trying to change things up and straddle the past of what everybody knows, the movie kind of sits in an uncomfortable middle position for me a lot of the time, where it's Into Darkness is going to have a bigger problem with this, but this movie is playing with the fact that you know who all the characters are before you're introduced to them. So you have sort of introductions, which are winks at the camera that you know who Sulu is, you know who the Asian helmsman is, you know who the Russian other guy is, that's Chekhov and stuff like that. So while it's rebooting and it's kind of resetting and reintroducing you to everybody, you still kind of know these characters at core.
Sure.
And so that leaves you in this kind of a weird spot where, for me, the movie feels very much like a pilot where it's setting all of this up, but in and of itself, I'm not sure I'm particularly enamored with what's going on in the movie outside of itself. Mm-hmm. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I mean, I would counter that by saying I don't feel like it's really that winky as far as establishing the characters, because I feel like you could watch this movie not knowing anything about Star Trek and come away knowing who all the characters are, and I don't think it works. I don't think it's. I think the winkiest part about it is probably when McCoy says, "All she left me is my bones."
Yeah.
And that's obviously where the nickname comes from. But aside from that, it's like, I don't know. I don't really find it that much different than any other way you would establish a bunch of characters on a ship,
Who are you?
I'm with him. He's with me.
We are traveling at warp speed. How did you manage to beam aboard this ship?
Hey, you're the genius. You figure it out.
As acting captain of this vessel, I order you to answer the question.
Well, I'm not telling, acting captain. What now? That doesn't frustrate you, does it? My lack of cooperation. That doesn't make you angry.
Are you a member of Starfleet?
Yes. Can I get a towel, please?
Under penalty of court-martial, I order you to explain to me how you were able to beam aboard this ship while moving at warp.
Well, don't answer him.
You will answer me.
I feel there's a lot of scenes, especially Sulu and Chekhov. It's a lot of turn in your swivel chair, face the camera, and then say your full name to the camera. Like it's a. I just feel that you're playing off of that establishment, and the way that they introduce themselves is built on the fact that you're supposed to know who they are. So saying their whole name is kind of a revelation for it. And I think because they do that, they actually don't have a lot of time to. Like the movie feels to me very much of an introduction, in that they're not really even all that super concerned about the cataclysmic threat in a lot of ways. Like I think Nero is potentially one of the worst villains in all the Star Trek movies. Interesting.
Oh, he's terrible. I mean, I liken this movie to the Avengers more or less in the way that it's set up, in that your villain is fairly light as far as, or I should say thin.
Yeah.
As far as motivation and what his plot is, et cetera, et cetera. Because
but I'd say Nero's like set up. The Avengers is more generically set up. I just feel that Nero has like so much to him that they don't expand when they could at the same time.
Right, but I think they just kind of place him in there as this looming threat, as an excuse to spend time with these characters and watch the team get together, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Bad performance from Bana too. I don't like it.
It's really weird.
Yeah.
It is a weird performance. It's not
Hello, Christopher. My name's Nero.
I kind of enjoy that stuff. I kind of enjoy that stuff because it's so weird and so different and does not feel like a Star Trek villain.
He's also not a Romulan captain. He's just a Romulan guy, basically.
Yeah, he's just a dude.
Yeah.
But like at the same time, there is something really weird about the fact that when Spock's ship comes out of the time vortex or black hole or whatever, they like do a hard cut to the Romulan ship and everybody's just like laying around. Mm-hmm. And like they've just been doing nothing for 25 years.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird.
Do they mention how they've evaded things, or are they just hanging out and no one finds them or something?
I thought on this watch that maybe what George Kirk does at the beginning when he flies the ship into their ship damages their ship, so they're sort of like drifting in space or something. But that would then take them away from the point of exit, so they couldn't catch Spock. But I just assumed that there was something busted on their ship that they couldn't fly anywhere else. But I guess the point of their mission is to hang around until Spock shows up.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that they're Romulans from the future, but they never bring up the cloaking device. You'd imagine they'd be able to cloak and just kind of hang out for a long
does
time.
a mining ship really need a cloaking device?
Yeah, it seems easy enough to stick on all the ships. And I'm getting back to his ship. The thing that I do like about him is that he's this super advanced ship that's really just like a perfunctory mining ship of the present day. But when it goes back in time, it's like overpowered for everything else.
Yeah, I like his ship a lot. I like the design of it. It's this weird, like, stabby claw looking thing. It's very different, not a kind of ship you generally see in Star Trek.
Like a squid.
Very aggressive, yeah. Especially when it's coming out of the hole there. It looks like, it's very cool.
Yeah, he's... Nero's... I wish there was more to Nero, and I'm not crazy about the performance. I don't like the way he alternates between good and bad, really, and how he did the thing about introducing himself where he says, "Hello, Christopher, my name's Nero," is probably like the worst line delivery in the entire thing. I don't really understand it. But he's, I mean, his plot to get Spock is, I suppose, fine for how important and how like vital and how devastating his attack would actually be. He doesn't have that much of a megalomaniacal approach to things. Like, he doesn't have ultimate goals outside of just getting vengeance on people, which is fine, and there's nothing really wrong with that. But you would expect maybe just, I guess he's had 25 years to think about it, but you'd expect a little bit more of him talking about the Prime Universe. Although I'd imagine they don't want to get into that. He seems unsurprised by the situation that he finds himself in when he goes back in time, and I guess he's got those years to think about it, but he's really just lashing out at any Spock, and any Spock will do, I guess, is his motivation at a certain point.
Yeah, more or less. I think there's he doesn't have any like gratuitous knowledge of how time travel would work, so it's not like like the closest he gets is, I don't think he even realizes that he's created a new timeline. I think the closest that he gets to acknowledging that stuff is going to be different is when he's choking out Kirk at the end. Mm-hmm. And he's like, "I've read your file." I don't know why he would have read his file, but I guess, why not?
Reviewed his history.
Yeah. It had a lot to do in 25 years, I guess.
Yes, obviously.
And he's like, "Yeah, but you were destined to be the captain of the Enterprise, but that's going to change because I'm going to kill you," or whatever. Like, that's the closest he comes really to talking about the change in the timeline, and he's not really concerned with it, and it doesn't really bother me because he kind of has the one thing that he's into, and he's doing it irrespective of what his the consequences of his actions are.
Yeah.
I don't think I need a scene with Nero where he's like debating the difference in timelines or something.
Yeah, and the movie obviously wants to make you forget about the Prime timeline, even though they include Spock.
They talk about. I actually don't think that they are trying to get you to forget about it. I think they're just because they talk about the split enough to establish what's going on.
Yeah. I guess they want you focusing on this new cast as opposed to Spock's universe.
Yeah. They kind of lean into the fact that, things have changed now. Things are going to be different. I don't think they're necessarily trying to ignore what's come before. If they were, Spock wouldn't be in the movie.
Right. Yeah. Do you think things are significantly different enough in this universe? Are they interestingly different?
I think so. I think it's different enough that it gives you a lot of options as to what you could do, but I think they managed to thread the needle quite well as far as changing things up, but keeping them the same to the point where it doesn't seem alien to Star Trek fans. You know?
I think
it's not like Kirk is the son of a Fortune 500 guy who, something weird, some weird shit like that. Or this time Kirk is from Mars or whatever.
He's a very reserved, asexual figure who has no interest in anything. I think they do a gamut. I think McCoy is basically McCoy from TOS.
I love Carl Urban's performance because everybody else is kind of doing like, all right, I see what's going on. I see what this character in the acting style is. I'm going to try and adapt, but not do exactly the same thing. And Carl Urban is just like, I'm just going to do an impression of DeForest Kelley.
Yeah. Even gets his cadence down.
I think he's pretty good at it. Like he got the cadence down perfectly. Like when that first scene when he comes in and he's talking about And he's like, and then you go and your skin will boil and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's very good at it.
Good, right emphasis on the right words when he's saying
Yeah.
the syntax. I think Kirk is kind of... I find Kirk actually to be the least interesting of all of them. Even though Bones doesn't have a lot to do in this new one, nothing important anyway. Spock is probably the biggest change out of all the characters, where they're playing up the emotional aspect, and I think I really like what they are choosing to do with the Vulcans here. I think to a point. They seem... I really like Sarek, that in no matter what universe, Sarek is an asshole.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. You have a much better handle on what Sarek the character is than I do, and I was going to ask you how you like this Sarek.
I think he's good. I think the opening scene where he says the only logical thing to do was to marry your mother is a very good, cold Sarek line, I think, to have there. I think he warms up a little bit too much. There's the scene before Spock beams off at the end where he and Spock have a heart-to-heart about it that I don't think is really necessary. Yeah. But I generally like Sarek in this, and I think that the Vulcans are generally good, although I think that while Spock makes sense to be overly emotional, I find all of the High Council Vulcans to be fairly petty and borderline emotional a lot of the time. And I don't know if I really like that. I know they're trying to do it for drama, but I do like the fact that they're playing up Spock as basically a character who now is no longer the fully in control character that you had in TOS to a point, but he's more just like barely containing his anger a lot of the movie.
Yeah. Well, I like that. I like that that he has a, they kind of went and they look back at his concept, which is he's half Vulcan, half human. Vulcans are very logical and emotionless, and humans are prone to, emotional swings. And they make that a struggle for him, which I think is a nice change, especially in this version where you're kind of sidestepping Spock being a secondary character for like 3 seasons.
Yep.
Like on the TV show, it's Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, but they all it's Kirk, and then Spock is kind of there doing his thing, and McCoy's kind of there doing his thing. And Spock doesn't get a ton of room for growth in the show. They don't really get into him until they get into the movies, and they kind of push him to the forefront a bit. So it's nice with a recontextualizing of him and his place that they can kind of get into that stuff a little bit sooner.
Yeah, he's got a secret romance on the side that no one can know about. Or maybe it's not secret,
honestly,
but...
I think they played that. I thought they played that great. Watching it this time, I couldn't remember exactly when they let you in on the fact that those two are an item. And the scenes leading up to the point where they show you because she's like comforting him because Vulcan just exploded. I thought they play it really well, where it seems like they just know each other really well, and you don't assume that they're together because Spock is fairly asexual.
Yep. Yeah. The first scene that hints at it is when she gets assigned to the Farragut, and she says, "No, I'm coming on the Enterprise," and has him. I should
say he's fairly asexual, except in this universe, where at the end, Prime Spock is like, you know what? Why don't you stay in the Enterprise? I got to go bone down and rebuild the species.
Prime Spock just stuck, hanging out. Yeah, I think Spock, I do like the Spock thing. I'm not crazy about the point in the movie where Kirk has to make Spock angry to reveal that like he's been emotionally compromised or whatever, but I think it makes sense, but it's there's an aspect to the movie's plotting there where I'm never quite sure it feels of a piece with like the story as a whole that they're trying to say. It feels like it's really just a like key to unlock this door and to show something about Spock. You're going to do this to him, and then him just resign, like sort of being like, "Yes, I've been emotionally compromised. I'm going to step away now and not do this and stuff like that." I feel that maybe Spock is fairly underpowered in this movie in some ways, where he's played up as one of the two main characters because he has an introduction right after Kirk does, but he never really. There's no. I guess if you were watching this as someone familiar with the TOS original films and series, you'd probably expect a little bit more conflict between the two of them. Interestingly, and I feel they smooth over that pretty quickly in this movie. Like they're at odds, but they're not their differences are not really like the driving conflict between the movie in a way that you would expect.
Sure.
They get along pretty easily outside of some bickering with each other. Very McCoy and Spock bickering between Kirk and Spock.
Yeah, I guess. I think once Kirk makes it back onto the ship and emotionally compromises Spock, things smooth out pretty easily. But before that, I feel like they're fairly well at odds for the amount of time that they have to spend together on screen. At the point where Kirk takes over, you kind of have to have them more or less on the same page at that point in the story, I think. I have less of a problem with the emotionally compromising scene than I do with the fact that Spock just puts him into an escape pod and jettisons him onto a planet.
Yeah.
That's really weird. That whole sequence I think is really strange. And that's a very JJ Abrams sequence where it's like they just came off of this massive battle scene and then Kirk gets marooned on a desolate planet. So instead of like slowing it down and having him walk and just kind of like get to the next point naturally, there has to be not one giant monster that chases him down, but a giant monster who's then eaten by a bigger monster.
Star Warsy.
Who then chase. I wouldn't even call that Star Wars. That's specifically JJ Abrams' thing because he does the same thing in The Force Awakens.
The prequels do it. They in the underwater sequences.
Oh, that's true. That's a good point.
Yeah. And doesn't a big thing eat them in Empire? Doesn't a big thing come out of the tunnel and eat the little?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll give you that. It is fairly Star Warsy. But it's the kind of thing where it's like it's a really unnecessary. He loves the unnecessary monster chase.
Yeah.
And especially one that doesn't make a ton of sense because that thing should be able to kill Kirk fairly quickly.
Yeah, he's not running that fast to the point where you'd find it believable.
The only reason it's there is to get him from the ship to Spock.
Yeah.
And I feel like they could have dialed it down and like let it breathe a little bit at that point. It doesn't have to be, high on action the entire time. But
yeah, and that planet is apparently right next door to Vulcan too, because you can stand on it and watch Vulcan be destroyed like it's a moon.
Which is really convenient, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's. Yeah, I guess it makes more sense for Nero to put Spock there because he wants him to be able to see this and feel the pain or whatever that he's experienced himself.
Yeah, I don't know why he doesn't I don't know why he doesn't keep him on the ship. I mean, obviously you need him on the planet so Kirk can meet him.
Yeah,
but like theoretically, it would be like in Star Wars where Tarkin is like, look out this bay window here and watch your planet get blown up.
Yeah, and then Kirk meets him when he's captured by Nero and put into the same cell block or something, and Spock is just in there.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's.
But then they couldn't meet Scotty if you do that. So.
Yeah, that's the other. The Scotty comes in pretty late into it, which is interesting that they throw him in. I do like his little goofball Star Wars-esque character as like his like co-engineer or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that they. I think I do like generally all of the characters in this. I think Spock is pretty good. I think the Bones performance is fine. I think Peg as Scotty is he's probably my favorite comedy across the entire thing. People say that this is a successful comedic take on things, or at least that it's a funny movie. I think it's like an appropriately Star Warsy fun or Star Trekky funny movie. I don't think it's like knee slapping or anything like that, but a couple of the jokes are okay, but most of them are just like little buttons on scenes that move you into the next spot, and they're not offensive or anything. But I wouldn't say that this franchise or this take on the franchise really excels in any kind of comedy stuff.
No, I actually think it's a little too silly in spots.
You like the scene where they're all in their underwear, where Kirk's having sex with the green lady, and then Uhura comes in and gets naked for no reason, and then everyone's in their underwear just running
she's
around.
Changing her clothes. She's been out at listening to Klingon shit all night.
Was your roommate ever laying on the bed seductively like that? Maybe it's not.
Well, I never had a sexy green alien roommate. I like that didn't really bother me. Injecting him with the virus thing, the vaccine thing, is a little bit probably too silly.
Yeah.
Especially when his hands start blowing up.
Repeatedly injecting him with things.
Yeah. And I think my least favorite thing, well, I'll get to my least favorite thing in the movie, but as far as like comedy beats, I think the Kobayashi Maru sequence is way too silly.
The apple is a little bit over the top.
When I envisioned Kirk cheating by rewiring the test, I never imagined him like being so open about it.
Right.
You know, I imagine there was a little bit more espionage involved than him just like sitting down and reading a book while the thing just fixes it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, as there's a hard reboot and everyone goes, what happens? And then everything is fine at that point.
Yeah. And it's like, they should know it. And the guy turns to Spock and he's like, how did he beat your test? And he's like, I don't know. Yeah. He clearly cheated.
You're right.
Like there's no like if, and, or but about it. I wish they had done something a little bit more, less jokey and a little bit more, espionage or something. I don't know.
I know they were trying to spin it to make the Kobayashi Maru mean something different in this different timeline. Mm-hmm. I think what it means in the prime timeline is much more interesting and true to form than what it means here, where they're gonna like court-martial him over this cheating or something. Like the Kobayashi Maru is like a test of like captaincy. I feel like any timeline that they're in Star Trek, like no matter what the timeline is, I feel like the senior people who are giving the test would respect the fact that someone did that to the test. Like that feels like it feels like that's an important understanding or a way to gauge someone's character in a way that just having them run through the ringer and not win. And I know Spock here is like, because I think the reason it doesn't work in the Kelvin universe is because Spock is like, this is about learning what sacrifice is like. Like you have to feel the punishment. But if that's the case, no one feels that in a simulation. So why does that matter? The other original Primeline take on it is much more interesting, where Kirk is willing to do anything to rig the game in his favor. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of just like the drama that they have to generate for the movie, because you need to put, it's the first collision course you have between Spock and Kirk.
Yeah.
And you know, that's the court-martial scene with Tyler Perry for some reason.
Was that Tyler Perry?
Yeah, it's Tyler Perry. I actually like that scene. I completely know what you're saying, but I do like the way that they have them butt heads about it.
Yep.
But yeah, I would agree with you generally. I think it's more interesting the way that they use it in Wrath of Khan than the way that they use it here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're kind of playing up like the chaos versus order aspect of Spock and Kirk in that court-martial scene, where Spock is very much like, this is the rules of the game, you have to play it, and Kirk's not doing that or anything. But yeah, I don't, it goes back to my point of they don't really interact, like they, you know, Pike is there present for a lot of mediating between the two of them.
Yeah.
So you don't get a lot of just the back and forth of Spock explaining why the rules are important in this way, and then Kirk realizing that he has to, the way that he beats over Spock by emotionally compromising him is to kind of cheat a little bit. Like he brings up kind of unfair things that you're not really supposed to bring up in turn of conversation. And I guess it links there to show that that's how he's going to compromise Spock and show everything. But it I don't know. It doesn't work with me the same way that I think it works in the original timeline.
Yeah, I think it's the way in which they're using it is just different. It is funny how I think a different movie would kind of take this and go more like buddy cop with, because you're saying like they don't spend a ton of time together butting heads. And I think that's just because there's so many characters you have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, Sulu going down with Spock is an interesting thing that you wouldn't expect. You would expect Spock would go down with Sulu onto the digging drill scene.
You mean Sulu going down with Kirk?
Sulu going down. Sorry, Sulu would be replaced by Spock in that sequence.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But in a different movie, I think they might go a little bit more buddy cop, where after the court martial, you know, you bring your two arguing cops together into the chief's room, and he goes, "You know what? You two, you're partners now." And they're like, "What?"
Yeah. We got budget cuts, gentlemen. We only got office space.
I suggest you two work it out because you're working together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chief, you can't do that. This guy's a maniac.
They bump shoulders walking out past each other into the thing. Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned the winky. What was your winkiest thing that you brought up in this movie? I can't remember. You mentioned that something was the most obvious wink.
Bones. Saying the bones thing. But even that, it's like it's winky, but I like it because that's something that I've never really thought about, and they kind of give you an interesting backstory to it that's just like one quick line, and
Yeah.
I thought it worked pretty well. It's a lot. I found myself thinking about Solo quite a bit while I was watching this, and again, I was just thinking about how this handles that stuff much better than Solo does, where you have McCoy introduced, you kind of give a sense of his character, and then he says that line that turns into what his nickname is going to be. Works a lot better for me than Chewbacca, huh? Well, that's too long. I'm not going to say that every time. We're going to have to think of something shorter to call you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Star Trek is, because this is not actually the history of what happens, they're allowed to play with it a little bit. And I think that
Right.
that's, he's only called Bones in TOS, the TV series, because it's a shorthand for Bonesaw.
Oh, really? I don't think I even knew that.
Yeah, so they kind of, this is a unique bit of information only in the Kelvin universe, it seems.
Yeah, I think it works. I like that.
Which, well, I guess that, because he would be dating after the split, so I guess that the timeline split there wouldn't actually make a difference. I was going to say the other winkiest thing that I really don't like is Sulu with his sword.
Oh, that sword is ridiculous. Like there's some things in this that definitely do feel more Star Wars than Star Trek, and that sword is 100% one of them.
Yeah, he's a fencer,
Like, what the
but
hell?
he's got this transformer sword.
Yeah, what the hell is that thing? Like, I don't know.
Because that one's awkward to me because he volunteers for advanced hand-to-hand combat, and then they stick in a character trait that you know from TOS, that Sulu has the sword thing. He was in that episode with his fencing sword.
Yeah.
Yeah, that feels a little bit strange. That sequence is kind of awkward to me, mostly because I think if there's one thing, probably my least favorite aspect of this movie is that I do find the direction and editing to be chaotic to a fault almost a lot of the time. It's that thing of like, just let us see the ships sometimes, and sometimes it looks really good, but I think that the way that they shoot space combat and stuff is kind of like, you'd like those shots, but you'd also like a little bit more of like an establishment of what things look like, and the action sequences, especially on the digging drill, are like really high energy, chaotic, a lot of fast camera movements and stuff like that. And not that it's necessarily bad, but it feels very generically actiony of this era of the past 2 decades of movie making that we've seen, in a way that's like, all right, it doesn't really do anything for me. I don't really buy that Star Trek people fight like this. Kind of like, it feels like the wrong franchise to do that stuff. Maybe Transformers would be fine or something, but it feels a little bit generic and uninteresting.
Yeah, I felt the style, not the look of it so much, but the camera style to be to feel kind of dated in a lot of places.
Always moving. Camera is constantly moving, spinning around.
And
people.
like the first place that stood out to me was the scene with Kirk and Pike at the bar when they're talking after the bar fight. And they're doing like the shaky cam thing while they're having like this quiet conversation. And I was like, I forgot that this was like every movie for 5 years did this.
Yeah. Because
it's just such there's no reason why you need to go like cinema verite handheld to do this quiet sequence where Kirk talks to Pike about,
his dad,
what it means to join Starfleet and his dad's legacy and stuff.
Yeah. Because people always bring up the lens flare as an issue, but I like the lens flare because
I think they look great.
I think it fits the atmosphere of the series, really. Like, you're either in space and you have a star in the distance, or you're on this bright, shiny bridge where all the reflections are coming at you, and it feels like it's a lived-in thing. It doesn't really bother me. I'm much more bothered by the camera work that goes on. Yeah.
And they do that thing that I feel like they don't do it much anymore. But there was like a period of maybe 3 years where they started doing this quite a bit. The artificial CGI zoom, where like you're in a really deep long shot of like the ship flying by the sun or something, and then they do this computer rack focus where you go zoom in and like super close and focus in on whatever the small thing is, and it's a weird artificial effect that showed up in a lot of stuff around this time. Like they did it a lot in the Zack Snyder Superman movie. And I feel like at the time it felt really novel, but I feel like it got old really quickly because I don't feel like anybody really does it anymore.
Yeah. I always think of it as looking through a scope or something. They have to do it because they have so much effects around the image of what they're zooming on that they have to do it. But yeah, I don't know why they would do it. Just obviously because they're working in such an artificial environment, I guess.
Well, it's a nice way to. It's an interesting way to show like the scope of something, but then also zero in on what the main point of it is.
Right.
Like it's the kind of, you would do that kind of thing normally with a camera, but it just feels really odd. I don't know. It's a very odd effect.
I like the, one thing I've been thinking in context of Discovery is I think that they did a pretty good job in these movies of, matching, but updating the look of TOS. I think that the ship designs in this are really good. They look new and they look different.
I love the Enterprise in this movie. I think it looks great.
Yeah, the Enterprise looks good. I notice it with the shuttles. The shuttles look very much like TOS shuttles, but they look updated. And they look like they belong in this universe in a way that I don't feel that way with Discovery. I feel like Discovery shuttles don't resemble that look or feel. And I think in general they did a really good job here. I don't think cyberpunk is the right thing, but there's a kind of, the only real problem I have aesthetically is there's a strange or unexpected combination of lo-fi and hi-fi in this that I don't know if I really buy. It goes outside of like the car, but like Kirk riding a motorcycle feels strange when, he's clearly making a conscious choice to ride a two-wheeled vehicle when the cops have hovercrafts that they chase around on.
Right.
And I don't really know what that's supposed to say about him. He's just too cool for Starfleet, but he's not too cool for Starfleet because he joins easily. So it's just it's a weird combination of the lo-fi and the hi-fi sometimes.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, if we could get into the number one thing about this movie that I absolutely hate, can we talk about the stealing of the Mustang sequence with young Kirk?
Sure. Do you want to lay out your case for why this is the finest scene of cinematic history?
I hate it so much. First of all, that car would be like 300 years old.
Yep.
Secondly, it's just such a. I don't need a scene where young Kirk is like, "Fuck you, Todd. You're not my real dad."
Who did he steal it from? Do we even know who he's?
I assume it was his. I thought it was like his mother's new husband or something.
Oh, okay. Maybe that makes sense. Yeah. Curiously, you don't see his mother after that. Interesting. Yeah.
No. And it feels like it's like an ad exec turning to the person in charge, going like, "We need a scene that tells people this isn't their daddy's Star Trek," or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's the music choice is over the top. It's a redundant scene.
He's playing music from 1800. It would be like us driving around to.
It's like if when I was 13 years old, I stole my stepdad's schooner, 1500 schooner, and then like zoomed off listening to Mozart or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And I find it a very pointless, over the top scene that is ultimately redundant. Because the next scene with Kirk is much, much better of giving you the same information. It's just giving you this silly, action beat designed to quote unquote look cool. Yep. That's telling you that, oh, he's a rebel and doesn't play by the rules, where you get all of that information in the bar scene.
Yes.
Like you get so much more about him in that bar scene. And if you're looking at the way, between Kirk and Spock, the scenes that they have, right? You've got, excuse me, the introductory scenes, I mean. You've got Kirk's birth, which tells you a lot about Kirk, oddly enough, in that one great opening sequence, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, very good.
And then you've got Spock as a child, telling you what you need to know about Spock's upbringing as a child, where Vulcan bullies are hilarious to me, by the way, how they logically like go through their list of ways to provoke them, which I think is really funny.
Also, that gave a lot to Discovery's design of Vulcan. Like Discovery basically just aped what this movie looked like for Vulcan in terms of what they study in like little hollowed out half circles for some reason. Yeah.
Those sweet, emptied out pools that they used to skateboard in.
those kids kind of feel to me like an update that fits in hand with how the Vulcans in general are portrayed. Like, I don't really believe that Vulcan bullies would be that way. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
It does.
You like it?
Sorry. I don't think that I do. It feels kind of ham-fisted to me.
It feels too emotional. Like, I see Vulcan bullying as a lot of under the breath comments about each other, and the way that Sarek and Spock talk to each other feels very much like what Vulcan bullying would be.
Well, my only thing about it that I kind of like is that they kind of make the point of saying that Vulcans work to suppress their emotions, which doesn't mean that they don't have them.
Yep.
It's just that they have chosen to suppress them. So I would believe that is a learned ability.
Sure. So young kids are not good at it to that point.
Yeah, young kids would be not good at it, and that they would be more prone to acting emotionally. So young Vulcans fighting each other doesn't really bother me. What bothers me is that they play them like older Vulcans, but doing like kids stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just the dialogue is kind of weird, where it's like, I guess the only logical conclusion is that his mother is a whore. You know, it's kind of weird. But anyway, so you've got the great scene with Kirk being born. That gives you a lot of information about the circumstances of his birth. You've got the scene with young Spock where you get into like some of his challenges. Then you've got the older scene with Kirk, where you really get into his character, involving the bar fight and the stuff with Pike. And then you have older Spock, where you get the great scene with his mom. I love that scene. I think it's really good. And I really enjoy the scene where he talks to the High Council. And I forget exactly what he says, but he basically tells them to go fuck themselves in a very Vulcan kind of style. I like that a lot. So you have essentially 2 scenes for each character that are giving you a lot of information. But then you have this outlier of this stupid scene where he steals a car and almost drives it off a cliff for some reason.
Yeah.
It's just really superfluous. And I know a lot of people, Sean Murphy and I argue about this all the time because he loves that scene.
He likes cars.
Yeah, I think it's because he drives a Mustang.
Yeah.
But I just think it's superfluous. I think it's silly. And I think it's not that this movie is perfect. It's not perfect, right? They're riding a line trying to get stuff done. For every great thing they do, there's a inflated hand sequence, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I take the good with the bad with this one. But if they had, that's one scene I would absolutely remove.
Yeah, I think my problem with it is just what I mentioned before. It seems like it's making a choice about what Kirk is. It's like it's almost making a Mandalorian statement about Mandalorian doesn't like droids for X reason. So you watch it going like, why is he driving a car? Like, why is he making this decision? Why does his motorcycle have wheels instead of a hovercraft? Like, what does that mean about Kirk? And I don't think it ends up in the movie meaning anything. It doesn't have anything to say about Kirk's character, but he's the more important thing is that he's just kind of the semi-loose cannon guy who's willing to take on threats bigger than himself type thing.
Which is all, you get all of that in the bar scene.
In the bar scene, and it's a much more effective way because it feels more visceral for him to basically fight for Starfleet officers than it does to jump out of a car in slow motion as it careens off a cliff, Thelma and Louise style.
Yeah. Yeah, I really hate it. And I know the only reason it's in there is because they're like, well, we have a kid Spock scene. We should probably have a kid Kirk scene. And you can tell from the kid Kirk scene that they didn't know what to do because it's redundant and it doesn't add anything and it's just there to equal the Spock scene.
Yeah, you need to Spock's story scenes are designed better there because you can't see one without the other. Like if you just jumped into Spock declining to go into the Vulcan Academy, you don't have that scene of explaining like why he'd be sensitive about his mother to that point. So
right.
You would just have to assume that, I guess this guy really likes his mother and doesn't want to see it as a weakness, which isn't really good enough. Kirk doesn't need that really because he doesn't have a backstory that is building in the bar scene. He has that same action repeating itself.
Right. And as far as Kirk goes, do you like his characterization in this movie?
I think he's all right. It's tough because when you think of Kirk and then you think of movie Kirk, you have like hundreds of hours of stuff to go off of.
Right.
Maybe not hundreds, but you have at least 100 hours worth of stuff to go off of between the show and the movies. And here, I think, if anything, it's only 3 movies that they got, and it's only 1 movie to this point that you've had with these characters. I never feel like I really settle in with any of the characters in this movie. They never have a conference room scene. Really, they do. They have 1 or 2, but it never and I really like those moments where it's a lot of like Star Trek-y back and forth discussing a problem that they're going to deal with. Mm-hmm. But the movie largely separates the characters, which seems to be a very Abrams thing to do. He likes to separate them. But I think that Star Trek largely functions as a franchise by playing those characterizations off of each other. And I don't know if they do it enough here for me to really feel great about any of them, Kirk included. He feels like the veneer of Kirk, but I'm not really sure I ever get under his skin to figure out what he actually is.
Yeah. I the first time I saw this, I didn't really like the characterization of Kirk because, as we learned from when we were going through TOS, Kirk is not quite the horned up Lothario that everybody makes him out to be.
Yeah.
And so this movie feels like that they created a version of Kirk that was based on the public or the popular conception of who Kirk was and not what his character actually was.
I guess to be fair, he's a mid-20s version of Kirk.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah. I on subsequent watches, I've been like, no, it makes sense that he would be more horned up and more of a loose cannon.
College kid. A college kid at this point in his career.
Yeah, he hasn't been the captain of a ship for 5 years. He's done, this is like how he gets the ship. So it makes more sense to me. And in the subsequent movies, he's a lot more toned down.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to talking about the third one because for all of its faults, I think it's probably the most Star Trek out of the 3 of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what I'm definitely agree with what you're saying, where you don't really get to spend enough time with everybody to really settle in. But what I do like about the way that they handle each one of these characters is you get, like, you're right. It very much is like this is the first story in a hopefully a franchise worth of stories. But what I like that they do is everybody who gets introduced has a fairly sizable amount of stuff to do.
Yeah, they have a task that goes on.
Yeah, Uhura kind of gets the short end of the stick, but even she is fairly prominent starting earlier in the movie. But like, it's not like Chekhov just swivels around in his chair and says, "Hi guys, I'm Chekhov," and then he's just there for the rest of the movie. He's actually doing stuff. Sulu is doing stuff. Sulu's more active in this movie than he probably was across 10 movies and 3 seasons of the show.
Yep.
Bones has stuff to do.
Pike's a fairly forgotten member of this movie series.
Yeah. Scotty has stuff to do. So they make sure they are all part of the story, and so they are kind of spread out at the beginning. But I think it works for me how that they're doing that because they end up together at the end, and you don't get that, like, camera spinning around the United Avengers before they fight off Loki, or whatever. But that's kind of what the final sequence is on the Enterprise, I guess. But you do get a kind of a fairly subtle version of that, which is a shot that I really like, where they're debating what to do about. It's after Spock has been taken off the bridge, and they're debating what to do, and Spock comes back, and you've got the whole cast is all standing there, and they're actually very nicely blocked. So it's like a really nice shot of the entire Enterprise crew, and then Spock comes in, and they kind of talk to Spock, and then Spock crosses into their zone as though he's like completing the set. And I always liked that little sequence, and I thought that was kind of like, that's when your crew comes together. From that point, obviously they've got other stuff to do, but up until that point, I should say, that's the point where everybody kind of, all the threads tie together with that crew for the first time.
Yeah, it's tough.
Surprisingly subtle. Like there's no moment at that point in the movie where it's like everybody gets on their stations, and then they do like like I said, the Avengers thing around the bridge as Kirk is in the seat. They don't do that.
Yeah. Kirk, Spock, why don't you come over, stand over here? I think that'll look a lot nicer. Yeah, it's tough because I think you have to grade these movies as their own independent thing, and I think comparing them to the original series or the original series movies isn't really what they're designed for, or what is fair to do to them. I think that the pace of the movie and the pace of the way that Abrams does things doesn't really lend it a lot to providing a kind of characterization that the older movies had. Like, it's when they're doing information, they're like very aggressively walking and talking somewhere. Like when Pike is telling them what's going to go on as he's going to go off to the shuttle, it's they're basically like at like a light run as they're like chasing behind him. And the pace of the entire movie is that fast. Like it feels like it never really has a chance to slow down and let people sit and do stuff. Like there's never a weird scene from the motion picture where they just kind of sit in short sleeve shirts and have a drink and stare at each other awkwardly. Like it doesn't have any time to do any of that. So if you're gauging it as a Star Trek thing, I think that it falls short of what I would say is kind of a Star Trek-y tone. But in terms of this movie, and I don't know how well this movie will really age because it feels very much of an era. And the biggest surprise to me was I feel like we've gone past origin stories. In a lot of ways, like movies no longer feel the need to do origin stories because they're all kind of similar to each other.
Right.
The Marvel movies have now, and with Spider-Man and stuff, have moved past that. But here, it felt a little bit old to have a true origin story where you see a young guy grow into something else, and you see how everyone comes together instead of meeting right in the middle and knowing the setup for it and then advancing from that point on.
Let's say they reboot Star Trek again, right? Would you prefer if the first rebooted Star Trek movie... I mean, okay, I guess this is unfair because we already had... This is the origin movie, but let's pretend this movie didn't exist. And they're going to reboot Star Trek. We're back in 2009. Would you prefer if they were just like, all right, we're just going to reboot Star Trek, so everybody's going to be on the ship, everything's going to be fully formed, we're just going to tell a Star Trek story?
I think that's the better way to do it. I mean, because I guess it depends on what you think the point of the movie. I wouldn't say that this is really this is an action blockbuster in the sense that I don't feel there's a tremendous amount going on underneath the hood. It's it's fairly simple and fairly on the surface as to what's going on. I think I would reboot it and just show the cast. This one's kind of a unique case though, because the rebooting it has changed things. So you kind of have to show why things have changed that way, which is maybe why its function as an origin story doesn't really bother me, because it's not it's not telling me the Spider-Man story where it's all right, this is where Peter Parker gets bitten by the spider and then he's going to have half an hour of figuring out his powers. This is me looking at it as a Star Trek fan saying, oh, these are the differences that they're setting up. So this is what I have to look for in the characters going forward. Right. This is why they're different. Yeah,
I think they made the right choice with this. Because I think establishing that this was a separate universe, more or less, is essential to having this go over at all with Star Trek fans.
Yep.
Because if they had just been like, no, we're gonna do a Star Trek movie and it's gonna be the original characters, just with different actors playing them in the same universe, then all you're doing there is inviting criticism.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think in this case, they did make the right decision. And I think this is a lot more interesting than I had read somewhere that they were planning on doing Kirk. It's funny how these things shake out when you hear about what had been planned and what they turned into. Because I had originally heard that they were going to do a Kirk and Spock at the Academy movie. That's it.
Yeah,
that was going to be the story, and I was like, ugh, who gives a shit? I don't care about that. But you do get some of that at the beginning, leading into this is Star Trek. The same way, with the X-Men movies. After the third X-Men movie, they were like, okay, we're going to do a Wolverine movie, and they did that, and it was terrible. And then around that time, they were saying we're going to do this Magneto movie, this Magneto origin movie, where he's hunting Nazis or something like that after the Second World War. And it's I don't know if I really want a whole movie about Magneto.
Yeah.
And then they make X-Men First Class that has a subplot about Magneto hunting Nazis. And you're like, oh shit, that's amazing.
Yeah. That's the best sequence in the movie.
Yeah, but they give you like just enough of it to really make it work. But like, do I really want to watch Magneto hunting Nazis?
Yeah, some stories work as B plots, or
Argentina?
not even a
Yeah,
B plot.
exactly.
Like, yeah.
But so it's like a good kernel of an idea that someone is like, let's turn that into a movie, and then someone who has a little bit more sense goes, what if we keep that idea and put it into whatever the next thing we do is?
Yeah, you know, I guess for what this movie was doing, I think I now approach it as, it's interesting where they came down on it is kind of right down the middle of them trying to appease old fans and bring new fans into something that they can be there from the start and not need to have all this baggage that comes in with it.
Sure.
I think if I have a criticism now of it, I think maybe they don't push it far enough, and that's purely like an artistic thing as opposed, like, I think what they did here is the smart business move for how they're going to make this movie. I think if you were in a world where you were truly seeing this as a separate take and separate universe from the Prime universe, I feel the differences should be played up a little bit more. I think they do the best job with Spock of doing that, but I feel like I would redefine Kirk's character a little bit more, because he's pretty much Kirk from the original series in this one. Bones is kind of the same character. I just feel that like they did a really good job with defining. They subtly tweaked the Vulcans to show why their emotions are actually a handicap for them in a way that I don't think they ever did before. And I would have been all for more of that kind of stuff. Like if you slightly tweak the relationship between Vulcan and Earth or something, or if you add some kind of like little wrinkle into what Starfleet's mission is in this universe or something like that. I would have liked that to be, this is the safe way to do it. But I think personally, if I were to redo them, that's probably what I would do. That would be my pitch.
Yeah. The one thing that I was actually looking for on rewatch is the representation of Starfleet, because I think over time, Starfleet has become analogous to the Army. And that's not what Starfleet is. Starfleet is, I mean, they obviously have defense and offense capabilities, but their point is not to be, you know, we're not exploring worlds where no one has gone before in order to shoot them. You know, they're a fairly peaceful organization. And I was worried on rewatch that the version of Starfleet was going to be too militarized, like it was going to read more like Starship Troopers than Star Trek, but I don't think it does. I think they ride the line fairly well. Yeah, where like the pitch that Pike gives Kirk about joining Starfleet was, I couldn't remember all of it, so I was worried that was going to be where they give you the be all you can be thing, and they kind of do, but not in the same, not in that sort of, not in a military sort of style, you know?
Yeah, it's more about self-sacrifice, really. It's like, if you can do half of what your father did in 12 minutes, then your life is a success. And his father's thing was saving lives as opposed to some kind of offensive that was going on.
Right, which I think, man, that I love those two lines where he's like, your father was a starship captain for 12 minutes. He saved 30,000 people. I dare you to do better. That's such a great line.
Yep. Yeah,
Pike is great in this. I really like Pike, and I never cared about Pike before, but between this Pike and Anson Mount's Pike, he's like top 3 of my favorite captains, I think.
Yeah, he's good. He's an interesting captain because he's unimportant enough where you can drastically change him in each version of the franchise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he works, and he's not shackled to prior expectations in the way that the other characters are. Like, because, you know, even a moderate Star Trek fan probably couldn't tell you that much about Pike going into movies like this. So you have a little latitude to play with him.
And they get him into a wheelchair a lot more gracefully than having him touch a time crystal. Jesus Christ. I did, one of my favorite little nods and details was his Admiral uniform at the end looks exactly like the motion picture uniforms.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
That I think anyway, it's that two-tone gray and white suit. It looks really cool. I like it.
Well, let's wrap it up there, I guess. You want to do you have any final thoughts about this one?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Red matter. What is it? They never explain what the hell it is. The scene where Spock mind melds with Kirk, he just nonchalantly says, I had this red matter in my ship and I used it to create a black hole. He never says red matter being X, or Kirk is never like, red matter, what is that? Right. It's just this amorphous thing that can cause this thing. It's like a time orb, essentially.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want an answer. Like, I don't think getting an answer makes it any better, but not having an answer kind of makes it feel like the plot device that it is.
The only thing I think about the red matter is when they're preparing it, right, to show you the sheer power of red matter, they take like a little tiny drop and then it makes a huge black hole. Spock's entire ship supply blows up at the end, so I'm imagining the black hole they created is like galaxy consuming.
Oh yeah, I was thinking that too. Like if you blow up all of that shit at the same time, you're probably create like your own pocket universe or something.
Right. It just splits off all the Star Trek spinoffs at that point. Come from Spock's gigantic supply of red matter. Going, yeah, it's just a MacGuffin, I suppose, and it does its job, and it's good for swallowing stars. I mean, the other funny thing is that they don't really explain why Spock was late to stop the supernova. You know?
Yeah,
he's just on his way, and it happened.
Yeah, I think the implication is not that he was late; it's just that it happened earlier than he thought it was going to happen.
It's funny because from Nero's perspective, you would have expected the red matter experiment to somehow be responsible for also destroying Romulus. Instead of Nero overreacting to Spock getting a haircut on the way there feels appropriate, but it doesn't feel like it feels slightly less dramatic than you're expecting from a Nero character.
Yeah, it's tough though, because it's like your two options are either, I mean, you have to have Nero blame Spock, and I think you can hand wave that, being like, he's going to blame him because he's the guy involved. He probably didn't. Nero doesn't know exactly what Spock did or didn't do, so he can probably very easily connect A and B and put all of his anger towards Spock. But on Spock's end, it's either the supernova happens too early, or Spock accidentally destroys Romulus.
Well, I mean,
and I don't think that they're going to do that.
You can combine them, right? Like, so Spock is heading towards the supernova, and he sees that it happens early. He has to launch the red matter so close to Romulus to stop it that it accidentally destroys Romulus too. Like in order to save the rest of the planets in the system or something, he makes that decision to do that. And Nero at that point, I think, feels justified in what he's doing. It's interesting in the movie just because they really don't explain it. Spock's just like, I got there too late. Like there was nothing I could really do.
Well, yeah, I think it's a matter of, I don't disagree. I think they could have done that, but it's like, then you have prime Spock with this fucking weight on his shoulder that he accidentally destroyed, or even darker, intentionally, knowing it was going to happen, wiped out all of Romulus.
Yep.
And I don't think this is the movie to get into that, unfortunately. And if they had gotten into it and then just kind of mentioned it in that mind meld, I think you'd come away going like, wait, Spock killed everybody on Romulus?
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's true, because maybe I'm looking at it as that's the thing that's missing for me, like some sort of deeper conflict going on between Spock and everyone else, and maybe you somehow thematically tie that into what is going on in Vulcan and this Kelvin universe,
I think there's probably room for something like that, because Prime Spock ultimately is just an exposition machine, right?
Yeah, he's just stuck in this universe too after this, right? So he just goes, at some point in his life, he just falls into the Kelvin universe and is stuck there.
Yeah, God, I can't wait to talk about how much I hate the way they use him in the next one. Yeah, I think if you wanted to break it a little bit more, having Spock, having the stuff that he tells Kirk have that sort of emotional hook to it, where it's like something that I did or something that happened I feel responsible for, which is why you need to do this so you can learn from my mistakes or something like that.
Yeah, I
think probably has a little bit more weight to it than just him being like, hey, I'm from a different universe. Let's explain how we all got here.
Right. Yeah, good to see you again, Jim. Yeah. My final thoughts for this one, I suppose, are I like this more than I was expecting. I had the faintest of memories of not really liking the movie. I think it's good. I do think it's very prototypical, sort of. Like, it feels like they are just setting up things for it. It feels like a pilot, as I said before. It's I guess over the context of the rest of the movies, I'd probably put this somewhere towards like the upper middle of Star Trek movies.
Yeah. I would say, honestly, this is probably my third or fourth favorite Star Trek movie.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what I put. I would put Wrath of Khan, Voyage Home, First Contact, maybe Undiscovered Country ahead of it, and then maybe this one. So it's somewhere around Undiscovered Country and where I would put it personally.
Yeah, just going off of movies that, well, I haven't always had the other ones, but even still, the rewatch numbers that I have would put this probably behind. It would probably be Wrath of Khan, First Contact, and this one. It would be my top three, I think.
Yeah. It's an interesting. It's certainly not bad. It's a good way to expand the franchise. I think it is very much like the action franchise of this. Although there's surprisingly little action in this movie, I guess might be my other big surprise. So it's not a balls to the wall John Wick type thing that's going on. It feels much more Star Trek-y than that, but it is more action based than a lot of the movies that we're used to or what fans of the series would be expecting, which is probably where that criticism comes from. But I think it's a perfectly fine, serviceable JJ Abrams style update of Star Trek, and we'll see where it goes with the movies after it. But it feels like it's definitely leading towards something else, as opposed to standing on its own as its own little story, at least in the way that I view, in my opinion of it.
Yeah, it's making me realize the cliche is fairly true about JJ Abrams is who you want to revitalize your property, but he's not the one you want to continue it. Because I thought the next one was terrible.
Does Abrams who directs the third as well?
Justin Lin.
Oh, that's right. It's the Fast and Furious thing. So Abrams does the second one.
Yeah. And, just to kind of circle back for a quick second about, you were saying how you wish they pushed things even further with making things different. When it was coming up, because I think this movie did what it needed to do. It got Star Trek back into the zeitgeist. It got younger people into it. It kind of revitalized the franchise, albeit fairly briefly. Because by the third one, I feel like the second one kind of killed it, and then the third one kind of like it sort of limped across the finish line a bit.
Yeah. Yep.
And I was really surprised in the third one that they didn't swing for the fence a little bit more. And I know that the second one kind of was arguably when they swung for the fence, and they ended up striking out, in my opinion anyway. Yeah. But like, as far as pushing it further, I don't know why. Like, if it was me, if it was like, okay, the second Star Trek movie, we did the Khan thing, didn't really work, people didn't really buy it, what are we going to do next? I would say, like, all bets are off, man. You've created a new universe. Bring in fucking Q or the Borg or something that no one's seen before. Kirk versus the Borg. No one's seen that ever.
Right.
I would love to see that.
Yeah.
Something like that. Bring in the Cardassians or something. Do something that would be like a marquee event that would be like, oh shit, I've never seen that before.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's where my thing about pushing it a little bit harder would come from. And I think that the problems that we'll get into in the second one have to do with the series being the franchise of these new movies being unsure of how far you can actually take it from Star Trek, what is known as Star Trek.
Right.
Khan is the best example of that, I think. But yeah, I think it's it. I think that I think the movies did suffer. The reason you could get 6 movies out of the original cast is, I think, because the TV show existed. I don't feel that even across the 3 movies of these, I ever really feel like I'm in with the crew of this franchise, of this series of the franchise. They don't have time to bond in that way. And I think the new Star Wars Abrams stuff is the same thing, where maybe a lot of it is nostalgia of people just know the older original trilogy because they've watched it 5 billion times over the course of 40 years or something. But I do feel they didn't, because of Abrams' filmmaking style, you don't get a chance to really sit with characters all that often in it. He likes to move them around. He likes to have action going on. He likes to have things splintering and people going off in different directions. And I feel there's the Star Trek movies, because Star Trek is such a franchise that is based around the crew relationships. Like, people have said it, but like, I'm starting to really understand that Star Trek successful franchises are about a group of friends in space, basically hanging out.
Yes.
And I don't think these movies really enable that strength of the franchise in that way. That would be helpful and would have provided a little bit of staying power.
Yeah. And maybe we could talk about this more after the third one. But what's really interesting to me is whether or not they decide. I mean, because after a certain point, it feels like these guys are done. Maybe they get one more, maybe they don't. It's not looking good.
Yep.
But if you're gonna if you're gonna try and do Star Trek again, do you recast the Next Generation characters? Is that the next step? Is that you, let's say, okay, we're gonna continue with the Kelvin timeline, but we're doing TNG now? I
wouldn't do that. I would go different.
It's like I think it's the only thing you can do to get a movie out of it.
Probably. They would see it as the only, like, I think your other option is you give it to Tarantino and he does something new with it.
Right.
They're not doing that at this point, but that would be the way that you would save it, or not save it, but the only way to do something totally different is to give it to somebody that everyone goes like, well, I can't wait to see what he comes up with, he or she comes up with. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I would agree.
All right. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. If you enjoyed the content, you can support the show at patreon.com/thepensky file. It's much appreciated. A couple $2 a month. Get you extra stuff like podcasts and videos and blah, 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 all that stuff. And also, our Captain tier gets a very special shout out, which I will do in a second as soon as this thing loads. Special thanks goes to Andrew Cherlog, Ben Douglas, Captain Quark, Cardinal Doomsday, Christian Michaels, Christian Pouch, Darth Mosk, David Beardmore, David K, Dwayne Hackett, Eric Johnson, HH28, Yarpy, Jeffrey Koch, Joint Mango, Jordan Cooper, Kevin Reyes, Cal Barrett, Matt Courier 6, Matthew Cutler, Matt Ross, Mike Burnett, Nathan Elliott, Neil Brennan, Nick Sergi, Robert Cummins, Russell Elliott, Samuel Custer, Grim Santo, Sean Spinobi, Tark Latif, Tom Hiles, Vault 13 Hero, and Will Yates. Thank you very much for supporting the show. All the social media links are down below, all that stuff. The Star Trek podcast continues as normal. Clay, do you have any updates, any new information?
We got the Rotten Horror Picture Show starting pretty soon, which is a horror movie podcast with me and Amanda, who joined us on Real Ripe and Real Rotten for Wes Craven. And it should be, I think the introduction episode will be going up pretty soon. And I think maybe a couple more
probably
weeks.
just post right the day or so after this one, I think, is probably when it's going to appear midweek of whenever this Star Trek comes out.
Yeah, and then I think our first episode will be probably shortly after that. So pretty soon.
Yep, I think that's it, guys. Thank you very much. You can also support the show by going to the TeePublic store if you want to buy a shirt or something. I should plug that more often than I do. There are shirts. There's a link down below. You can follow it. I think that's pretty much it. Everything else continues as normal. Star Trek Picard comes soon. I think we're going to finish these movies before then, so we should have all the Kelvin movies out of the way.
Cool.
And then Picard will start, and then we'll let you know how it goes. So, thank you very much for listening. See you later.